Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 24 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. And as always, we're going to go over the copyright information first, which is always super important. As you can see, A Natural History of Dragons is copyright 2013 by Bryn Noonschwander. All rights reserved. Interior illustrations are by Todd Lockwood. Maps by Rhys Davies and designed by Greg Collins. In the last part, Lady Trent and Dagmira discovered that it was Astoria that was behind the weird dragon footprints because they found the acid in his house, and Astoria ran away. And so Lady Trent said that if there was no problem or if there was no disturbance that night, then basically if there was actually a disturbance, then they would leave on their own. Anyways, and Mr. Wilker didn't take too kindly to that, and then Lady Trent realized that, well, basically the villagers could basically stir up trouble and get them kicked out. But we're going to see what happened here, and we're going to go back a little ways. Okay. But apparently he considered the argument at an end, for he stormed out of the workroom. I wondered if I had won or lost. Jacob sighed and dropped into a chair. After a moment, he asked, "How many bottles did you say he had?" "Half a dozen." My husband shook his head. "Where in heaven did he get them?" The bottles in question were with Lord Hilford and the mayor, but I remembered them well enough. The writing on the labels was Chiavorin. Jacob and I wondered if the plan to drive us away was formed even before we came here. The specter of the missing Gretelkin hung over us, more ominous than ever. Jacob said, "Then why wait so long? Why not cause trouble as soon as we arrived?" We hadn't been to the ruins yet. Astomir needed a justification for his haunting. He could have invited you sooner, though. That was true. I thought back through our time in Drustanev. The invitation had come after my misadventure with the smugglers. Perhaps it had something to do with them after all. They might have provided Astomir with the acid. Though why they would have it on hand themselves, I could not guess. They had not killed me, but then killing a skirling gentlewoman would have brought a great deal of trouble down on them. Scaring her off, on the other hand, would not. But why not threaten me then? Too many questions. I fingered the firestone in my pocket. Acid, smugglers, rockworm attacks, Gretelkin missing, this charade with Zangrit Mott, the dragon graveyard, the ruins. I could not tell if we had too little data or too much. I was convinced at least some of the pieces belonged together, but I could not tell which ones, and they all stubbornly refused to form a clear picture. I told myself to take one problem at a time. This is not always useful advice. One does not always have the leisure, and some problems are best tackled together. But at the moment, I could see no useful course of action except to make certain we were not driven out of Vestrana in the morning. That must come first. And once again, addressing the nearest problem first, it might be best if we all got a little sleep that afternoon so as to be fresh for the night. Mr. Wilker in particularly. I drew breath to say as much to Jacob when a knock on the workroom door forestalled me. Back home in Skirland, of course, we would have had servants to receive any visitors, inquire of their business, and then interrupt our conversation in as graceful a manner as possible. Here in Drustanev, we had Dagmira, Iljish, and our cook, whose name I had never learned. The first two were somewhere in the village, asking of Astomir's treachery. Talking of Astomir's treachery, and the cook came only twice a day. Jacob and I, therefore, found ourselves blinking at a total stranger, without the faintest clue who he was, why he had decided to walk into our house without invitation. He was rather more finely dressed than your average Vestrani peasant, his heavy coat hanging to the knees. Oh, his heavy coat hanging to the knees was of fine wool, and the leather boots below shone beneath their dusting of dirt. It was a style of attire I had seen before, and as soon as I placed it, the words leapt from my mouth. "You're one of the Boyer's men." The the bow he executed looked foreign to my inexperienced eye, and when he spoke, even my ear could detect a different accent in his Vestrani. "I am Reuven Danilovic Ledinsky, Stolnik to the Boyer. Yes." He glanced past me to Jacob. "You are one of the skirling companions to the Earl of Hilford." Jacob gathered his wits and came forward. I did not mind a little more time to gather my own. My first nonsensical thought was that this man, this Stolnik, whatever that was, had come to evict us from Drusenev, where the locals could not. "Yes, I'm Jacob Camhurst, and this is my wife." This was not, I thought, the same man I had spied upon at the ruins, overseeing the smugglers' work. Ledinsky was older than that fellow, with gray salted into his hair. The fur-trimmed cap the man at the ruins had worn might have concealed that, but I did not think so, which removed or at least weakened one of the other possibilities for why he might be there. "I come bearing a message from Iosif Abramovich Kursov," Ledinsky said. "He regrets the unfriendly welcome he gave to your lord, which was a consequence of his surprise. Iosif Abramovich did not know Gretelkin was bringing such honored visitors to his village, and was displeased to learn his Razesh had been so... to learn that his Razesh had been so inconsiderate. But he wishes to make amends now. He invites all of your party to visit his hunting lodge and enjoy his hospitality." A dubious glance cast around the workroom spoke volumes as to Ledinsky's opinion of the low conditions in which we were lodged at the time. Lodged all the time, rather. Those low conditions had mostly ceased to bother me, but the prospect of a few nights in the Boyer's lodge did appeal. Time away from the hostility of the villagers, which I suspected would persist even after we had made our point regarding Zangrit Mott, and a chance to put the matter of Astoria and the smugglers to Kursov, possibly even news of Gretelkin. When I glanced at Jacob, I saw him thinking the same. "I'll have to speak to Lord Hilford, of course," he said, "but your master honors us with the invitation. When would you like us to come?" "I have brought horses for you all," Ledinsky said. Neither of us understood right away. Jacob said, not quite believing, "You wish us to leave today?" Ledinsky nodded. "The cook is preparing a feast in your honor." "In our honor, perhaps, but this Vestrani Boyer had some cheek, expecting Lord Hilford to leap to his command. I knew from Lord Hilford's comments that the Boyer class had many distinctions within it. Where the Vestrani ones ranked, I did not precisely know, but given the client state condition of Vestrana, I doubted it trumped the status of a skirling earl. Jacob's frown mirrored my own. "I will let Lord Hilford know," he said, his tone hinting at cool disapproval. Whether Ledinsky heard it or not, I could not tell. He said, "I will send a boy to help you pack your things." He bowed himself out of the room. Jacob held up a cautioning hand when I would have spoken. "You should fetch Dagmira and Iljish. We'll want them with us, at least for the journey there. No doubt Kursov has servants of his own to wait on us once we've arrived. I'll send Wilker back in and go tell Hilford." Very well. I would not say what I thought of such a preemptory invitation. If we were going to tell Ladinsky to wait, it would be better coming from the Earl. In the meantime, I was not going to let some stranger pack our things. I hurried outside and saw Dagmira in the distance, arguing with two women at their front gate. Cupping my hands around my mouth, I called her name and beckoned for her to come. Fetch your brother, I said, with a sigh as she drew near. It seems we may be guests of the boyar for a few days. We did not refuse the invitation. Urjash Mushutin it seemed, had quite enough of the trouble we were causing in his heretofore quiet village. Be it supernatural or otherwise, he was not quite vexed enough to run us out of town. But when presented with such an ideal chance to be rid of us for a few days, he spoke volubly in favor. Ladinsky seemed to think we could depart immediately, but of course it was not so easy. The lodge lay 3 days' ride away, even on horseback. The beasts had little advantage over donkeys or our own feet. Along such tracks as the mountains afforded, we would need to pack clothes for that journey, and then better clothes for our time at the boyar's lodge. And of course, the stolnik was unhelpful as to how long the time might be. It would depend on his master's pleasure, Lord Hilford said. He said, resigned, which might be anywhere from a day to a month. We haven't the clothes, with us to look fine for a month, I said, even with laundry, but I will do what I can. At a minimum, I suppose we will want enough to be respectable for a week. That will give us time for someone to come back here and fetch the remainder, if it falls out such that we stay there longer. I did not like the thought of staying there longer. The lodge was quite in the opposite direction of the cavern graveyard, which we'd had no chance to show to the other two men. The panniers on Ladinsky's horses were not enough to hold everything we wished to bring, but he had not brought horses for Dagmira and Iljish either. They would have to ride donkeys, and so we might as well bring a third for the remainder of our baggage. Sorting all of this took the better part of what remained of the day, with the stolnik frowning impatiently over us. When it became apparent that we would not be able to make any distance worth mentioning, Lord Hilford insisted we stay in Drustanev for one more night. Jacob stepped aside with the Earl and asked quietly, "What will that mean for our situation here?" Lord Hilford shrugged, looking philosophical. "We may as well sleep, if we can." Majutin was quite adamant that we were not even a toe beyond the door tonight. He and a few of his fellows will keep their own watch. They'll do a better job of it than we could, anyway, if none of them decide they'd rather have us gone. The mayor is a fair-minded man, Lord Hilford said, unperturbed. He admitted, when I put it to him, that the local children dare each other to visit those ruins all the time. They may not want to consider that Astoria would fake such a thing, being that he's one of their own. But if this is a trick, then Majutin is determined to pillory whoever is responsible. With that, we had to be content, and it seemed to suffice, at least for one night, for when we rose the next morning there were no new disturbances to report. So it was with a feeling of vindication that we rode to meet Iosef Abramovich Kursov. Chapter 21. Okay, we're making good time. Chapter 21. Iosef Abramovich Kursov. Then Gaetano Rossi. Then opinion of Fendrik Gritelkin. The term hunting lodge had led me to expect something small and on the rustic side, the sort of place a gentleman or peer might retire for a week or two of shooting before returning to the comforts of a less isolated residence. Whatever the Whatever else might be said of Kursov's lodge, it was not small. The fence that surrounded it was no wartle and daub affair, but sturdy planks of wood, with a shingled roof over the gateway, which had doors sized to admit both carts and people on foot. For our distinguished party, the larger was unbarred and swung open, admitting us to the spacious courtyard beyond. Above us reared a three-story dwelling of roughly dressed stone walls that, as Mr. Wilker muttered under his breath, might have been dropped there by a dragon migrating from Bolskovo. I had a little eye for such things, but the crude scallops of decorative woodwork along the edge of the roof and the octagonal bay at one end certainly resembled nothing I had seen in Drustanev. The place would have been charmingly rustic, were it not for an unpleasant smell in the air. I hoped the odor did not originate in the kitchens, or the promised feast would be difficult to choke down. Someone must have been keeping watch for our arrival, as a man stood on the steps of the lodge, ready to greet us. It took no great deductive mind to guess that it was Kursov himself. His knee-length coat was of imported silk and held more embroidery than all of his followers' clothing combined. The man beneath all of the splendor judged to be about 50 to 55, with a beard gone mostly gray, springing magnificently from his jaw. He remained at his post while we dismounted from our horses, but spread his arms wide and said in a voice that boomed across the courtyard, "Welcome, honored guests, welcome." To my surprise, he spoke in Chiavorin, that country's favorable trade position in Antiope had made its language known to many, of course, and all within our party spoke it more fluently than we did Vistrani. Also, as I learned, few of the boyars of Vistrani actually spoke the language of their own subjects. They hold instead to Bolshoi, the language of the Tsar, relying on underlings to communicate with the locals, and in this Kursov was no exception. But I suspected the reason for that choice stood at his right hand, a man whose olive complexion and manner of dress marked him as a Chiavorin himself. This must be his scholar friend. Taking his cue from this, the Earl returned the greeting in kind. "We are honored to be welcomed in your house, Iosif Abramovich," Lord Hilford said, climbing the stairs. He could not suppress a wince as he went, even with the fine tent Ladinsky supplied. The journey had taken its toll on the man's aching joints. "I am Maxwell Oscott, Earl of Hilford," he introduced each of us in turn. I suffered Kursov to kiss both of my cheeks in the Bolshoi manner, wishing he had forgone the friendly gesture of greeting us as we arrived in favor of a more civilized skirling practice of allowing guests to freshen themselves briefly first. There was sap in my hair where a tree branch had knocked my bonnet askew. Our host then introduced us to his friend Gaetano Russi, bowed over my hand with perfunctory courtesy, for which I was grateful. My mind had chosen the most inopportune moment to remind me of my facetious comments to Jacob back home about Chiavorin dancing girls. "But come, it is late," Kursov said when the introductions were done. "I have servants waiting for you inside. You may send your peasants on their way." It was, I think, the dismissive manner in which he delivered those words that raised my hackles. Dagmira might have been a terrible excuse for a lady's maid, but I was suddenly determined not to be parted from her. Had anyone demanded a rationale from me, I would have said I saw no sign that there were any other women at this hunting lodge. Kursov was a widower, according to Ladinsky, with two sons both grown and trying to curry favor in the Tsar's court, and of course he could not possibly have fetched anyone in time for our arrival. If I was going to have a ham-handed Vistrani woman doing up my buttons, at least it would be the ham-handed woman I knew rather than a stranger. But my response was not rationale. was not rational. I simply did not like the fact that he had attempted to separate me from Dagmira and Iljish. I only barely managed to avoid saying so outright, which would have been unpardonably rude. I resorted instead to a silly caricature of some women I had known at home. Oh, I could not possibly be without Dagmira, I said deliberately, erring on her name. She's been my only companion all this time, and we've come to know each other quite well. I would feel quite lost without her, and of course her brother must stay too. I let that that trail off, gesturing vaguely in Iljish's direction, in a manner calculated to suggest that I had forgotten his name entirely. Oddly, though, I had grown more liberal minded with time, as my travels brought me into contact with many strangenesses to which I had no chance but to adapt. On this point, I have instead grown more inflexible. As a young woman, I was willing to be thought quite brainless when it suited my purposes, for that was all too often the assumption of those around me. Oh, for that was all too often the assumption of those around me. The more I encountered such assumptions, though, the less patience I had for them, and the more assertive, some would say, unpleasantly opinionated, I became. At that tender age, however, I had no compunction about behaving in a manner my current self would smack silly. Jacob gave me a peculiar look, which I hoped the bowyer did not see. What reports the man had of me, I did not know, but any quick summary of my activities in Vistrana rather, could well make me look fluff-brained. The harmless sort of fluff-brained, I mean, not the sort I actually was. I thought I saw Kurzov's lip curl in disdain as he looked over our two companions, but the concealing mass of his beard and mustache made it hard to be sure. Very well, he said at last, not quite as graciously. Russia will find a place for them. Lord Hilford had tried to coach us on the journey regarding the subtleties of Bolshoi names, but it still took me a moment to realize that Russia must be our guide. Ledinsky, a diminutive of Reuven, he gestured for Dagmir and Iljish to follow him. In the meanwhile, two of Kurzov's men hurried to open the doors of the lodge, and those of our party who were not servants went inside. We were shown to our rooms, one apiece for the Earl and Mr. Wilker, and a shared room for myself and Jacob. The chief extravagance of this place seemed to be the abundance of chambers and the willingness to squander wood in heating them. Our bed was certainly an improvement over our accommodations in Gretelkin's house, but nothing on the comforts of a skirling mattress, and the decorations were scanty. The serving boy who brought up a basin of water spoke no Chiavoran, and either lacked equally in Vestrani or was afraid of me. He just shrugged at my question about Dagmira and hurried out of the room. Why do you want her? Jacob asked once we were alone. I thought you detested the girl. Less than I used to. And besides, it's a friendly sort of detestation, I said. It's just, I lowered my voice inside the lodge. I lowered my voice. Inside the lodge was less charmingly rustic and more grim and dark. I had, at Manda Lewis's insistence, once read The Terrible Thirst of Var Kolak. The terribleness of that novel lies more in the overwrought prose than the monster Var Kolak. But standing in this place, I understood at last what had inspired Mr. Wallace's pen. We have few enough friends in this place, and I don't think Kurzov is one of them. I expected Jacob to chide me out of that view. It was easy to imagine my uneasiness, a simple fancy brought on by the isolation, but Jacob nodded and answered in the same low tone. We may be his guests, but I don't think we're welcome. The question is why did he invite us here? I had no answer. We washed our faces in the cold water and went down for supper with the boyer. Gaetano Rossi was not present, and after the first course had been laid, a style of service which I reflected we had acquired from the Bolshoi in the first place. Lord Hilford asked after the man. He is occupied with his work, Kurzov said, attacking his soup as if he, not we, had been riding for 3 days. Work? Lord Hilford repeated, with an inquiring tone. He is not here for leisure, then? Was it my imagination, or did Kurzov hesitate? It might only have been that the slice of beet in his soup was too large and overbalanced back into the bowl. He cut it with the edge of the spoon and said, Leisure, yes, but we have been hunting. The preservation of our trophies is his task. We're going to have to stop the video here. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe. And ring the bell so you know when I upload. We've been reading A Natural History of Dragons, Memoir by Lady Trent, a book by Brennan. If you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.